morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining. At CIQ, we're focused on powering the next generation of software infrastructure, leveraging the capabilities of cloud, hyperscale, and HPC. From research to the enterprise, our customers rely on us for the ultimate Rocky Linux, Werewolf, and Apptainer support escalation. We provide deep development capabilities and solutions, all delivered in the collaborative spirit of open source.
Yay!
Sorry. I thought whenever I got added in, it just took me off mute. It does not.
It did for me, man. So I don't know, what's going on over there.
Thanks. I know who to blame.
Hey, you guys, you can see this like huge smile and probably a glow just exuding from me right now. I am very, very excited for this webinar. I don't know. It just makes me so happy. So I saw this demo a couple of days ago and I was like, ooh, Jonathon, is that like ready for public eyes? Because it was kind of an internal demo. I'm like, this is going to be so amazing. So we're going to be talking about Fuzzball-Ansible Deployment with Ascender. Whew. So first of all, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for coming to our channel and being live and, participating in what it is that we were doing. We want you, we need you, we love you. If you have any questions, put them in the chat. We are very responsive. And if you ask them while we are live, of course, we will answer them live to the best of our ability. And if it's later, that's okay. We're still hanging out. We get notifications when you put in a comment or a question. So we'll be sure to get back to you. So yeah, give us a like and a subscribe. We're here mostly every week live. If not, we have awesome little recorded, demos and cool information about what's going on in CIQ and the compute world. So without further ado, let's introduce ourselves first. When you guys know me, hey, I'm Rose. I work at CIQ. I'm in the sales operations and admin. So if you need anything, questions about what it is that we're doing, or you want more information, you can go to our website, ciq.com, and just fill out any form there and it will come to us and we'll get back to you. So very happy to be here. Zane, say a little hello to the people.
Hello, people. It's been a while. I'm really excited about this demo because I didn't get to go and I haven't seen it. Man. And it uses a couple of my favorite tools. So I'm really excited to see this.
Cool.
But
yes.
I'm Zane. I'm on the sales team here at CIQ. Been around for a long time, almost 3 years, 3 years next month.
Wow. Congratulations.
Almost congratulations. Super close.
That's awesome. And Mr. Jonathon, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Rose. Thanks for the invite. Yeah, I enjoyed putting this together and happy to get it in front of more people.
Yeah.
Good to see you, Jonathon. I don't get to see you enough anymore.
Good to see you too, Zane. Sorry, I'm looking at one person and then the other.
All good. So, okay, so we have a little request to turn up your microphone, Jonathon.
Yeah.
If you can do that or kind of get closer to it, something.
How's this sound? Is that better or
actually, yes.
The same? Okay, great.
Yeah.
There's an auto adjust volume
to me.
setting in it, and it never, with this microphone, it's always apparently too quiet. But anyway, and now it's moving on its own. All right. Hopefully we're good.
Awesome. So there was a couple of shifts as we put, more focus on Fuzzball, and internally you went to work on Fuzzball. So maybe do you want to just give like a little overview to our audience what Fuzzball is?
Yeah. So Fuzzball is a kind of cloud focused, or not just cloud, but like inspired by some cloud computing paradigms, HPC and performance computing, provisioning resource manager scheduler system. So the goal is to take the experience that we have in a traditional HPC context and kind of pair it with experience that we have in a more cloud native context and take the best of both worlds and make something that can run bare metal high performance computing workloads, but run it anywhere with the flexibility and elasticity that you might expect in a cloud environment, and get some additional benefits along the way, like maybe a little bit more reproducibility than you might get in a traditional HPC environment. And yeah, it's been coming along. It's a cool project.
It has been coming along, and anyone in this world can relate to having an idea, going towards that idea and then having a couple of like, I don't know if stumbling blocks is really the right word, but opportunities to do things differently and to continue to iterate and do them better. And so that's what I imagine kind of incorporating Ansible and our product Ascender into the mix. So why don't you just give us a little overview of what Ascender is as well?
Sure. So, I mean, people may or may not already be familiar with Ansible, but it's one of kind of a family of, or a set of peers, kind of competitors in the space are like Puppet and Salt and Chef and things like that. Ansible is a kind of configuration-driven configuration management system where you can put how you want all of the nodes or all of the systems in your entire infrastructure down in configuration files and then mix it together and deploy it and make it be true. Kind of the goal here is defined state configuration, where instead of having just a person go and make changes on all of your computers, you can say, I want the computers to behave like this. Make it be that way, please. And so Ansible is one of the most approachable tools in that space. And then Ascender is a web front end for that gives some additional functionality that we'll show off a little bit here for bringing in your configuration data from different sources, managing secrets a little bit more intuitively, and then parallelizing that configuration process in kind of a useful way. And we'll get to see that a bit here. But to speak of legacy and the way that things kind of evolve and change over time, like the inspiration from this starts with doing on-prem deployments of Fuzzball. So we have like two ways of thinking of it. Either we're running the control plane for Fuzzball out in a cloud infrastructure, and we call that a cloud deployment, or we're running the control plane, what we call Fuzzball Orchestrate, on-prem in a local data center. We happen to be still deploying it in a cloud environment here for testing, but it's deployed in the on-prem way, the way you would do it locally at a site. Is there some feedback? No, are we good? Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm seeing notes down here that
it
maybe
seems like a little bit kind of like a wah, wah. I don't know.
I think it's just Rose. I don't hear it.
Okay. I'm going to ignore it for now.
Okay,
anyway,
fine.
So
Brandon might hear it. He made comments.
Historically, we've used a tool that we developed in-house called iCube to do these on-prem Fuzzball deployments. And the thinking here was that for an HPC audience, Kubernetes was still kind of a scary black box kind of thing. And Fuzzball, because we're taking expertise from a cloud native and an HPC environment and kind of mixing them together, one of the parts of that was that Fuzzball Orchestrate, our control plane, is developed as a Kubernetes application. So we needed a Kubernetes to deploy it into, but we thought that our customers might not have one and might not want to have to worry about that. So we developed iCube, which was kind of a minimal Kubernetes distribution in a sense, and then some automation around setting that up and deploying Fuzzball and potentially other CIQ applications into it. Over time, as we worked with our customers, we found that as history has progressed, our customers are more and more familiar with Kubernetes and not afraid of it, and in fact have an existing Kubernetes infrastructure that they want to use. Either they just have experience with an existing Kubernetes distribution that they already want to use, or they have a fully fledged infrastructure that they want to install Fuzzball into. So we pivoted for that deployment process and are now using what's referred to as a Kubernetes operator to deploy Fuzzball Orchestrate into an existing Kubernetes cluster, and then we provide some help around doing that deployment and around setting up a Kubernetes cluster if you don't already have one. For internal testing, we're targeting RKE2, or the Rancher Kubernetes Engine 2, version 2, also sometimes called, I think, Rancher Gov. It was its maybe former name, or maybe one of the product names around it. That's been a good experience so far, but some of the people at CIQ have also used the exact same deployment mechanism to just deploy it into other Kubernetes distributions. And I won't list them here for fear of one implying that we're testing it as well yet, or leaving one out. But so far, I think it's just worked on every distribution we've tried so far, even ones that I hadn't even known existed. So that's been exciting. But one of the benefits to that, because so that a Kubernetes operator is basically just a little application that you deploy as a Kubernetes pod. You deploy it into the cluster, and then it runs as an installer for your larger application. So we have a little custom resource that is called Fuzzball-Orchestrate that defines how you want your cluster to behave. And by putting that configuration into the cluster and having this operator there watching for that configuration to exist, it does some configuration management for your cluster. It wakes up and says, oh, look, I see that there is supposed to be a Fuzzball cluster, and I will make this Kubernetes environment have that. But because Kubernetes is a YAML-based configuration engine cluster thing, and Ansible, and therefore Ascender, is a YAML-based configuration management thing, it became very intuitive to put the two together. So we've been using Ansible internally to deploy Fuzzball, even with iCube, but it wasn't as straightforward as I would have wanted in order to put it in front of customers. But as soon as we moved over the operator and started deploying it that way, it just became something I was like, oh, yeah, this customer and that customer, they would actually really appreciate this. We should get that out there. So I'll go ahead and share this just to walk through it a little bit. But let me find here. I think this is the right one. That looks right. Try and get my windows moved somewhere where I can see everything that's going on. So we open sourced this. So it's not, there's not too much here, but this is what's called an Ansible Collection. So I'm not going to do a whole Ansible primer here, but configuration in Ansible is divided up into a number of different things that can define that configuration, and some of that is reusable. And so we've tried to push as much as we can into reusable code here as would be useful. So there's a set of roles, and these are our little bits of reusable configuration that can be applied to any host. So we have one here for setting up Depot, which is a content distribution system that we're using here at CIQ. We can deploy the CLI, the operator itself, orchestrate, anything that we need in order to set up a Fuzzball cluster. Then I had this already in a tab, but I'll skip over here to playbooks. Once you have those roles, you can assemble them together into what Ansible calls playbooks. We can look at one as an example right here. This is a really simple one. We'll deploy the Fuzzball command line interface, and there's a little bit of kind of magic here for making it easy to target which hosts you want to install that on. And this one's just using this Fuzzball CLI role and saying this node that we're going to run this playbook against should have that role. And then finally, talking about kind of things being YAML. YAML is a markup language that it looks like this right here. It's just a simple way to have configuration data in a text format. And one of the benefits is, if you saw a demo that we did earlier where we did a Fuzzball-Orchestrate deployment kind of by hand, the way if you were following a guide and just doing the instructions, one part of that instruction is make a document like this. And we give you an example and say, here are some values that you might need to change. A way we can do that with Ansible is just to encode the default settings. And there's some variables in here that you'll fill in, but provide default settings. And then in a bit, we'll show how you can override any part of this in what Ansible calls the inventory, which lists the nodes you want to deploy on, what parts of what things get deployed on what nodes, and then configuration if you need to override any part of that. So I have demos of this, but I'll stop for a minute real quick in case there's any questions on the web, or Zane or Rose, if you have any questions for this so far.
I don't yet, and I don't see any, so I think we're good to keep going, Jonathan.
Okay, so let me switch over then to my terminal. So
I just had a personal question for you real quick, actually, Jonathan. Thanks, as my mind is going. How familiar were you with Ansible in like your previous jobs? Did you ever use it there or personally? Like what's your experience with it?
I had used Ansible a little bit at a former role. So I mostly had used Puppet before. And I'm kind of a finicky person, so none of these are my favorite. They all have something that I wish was different. I wish all of them had a little bit of each other in them. But the really great thing about Ansible is it's so easy to get up and running with because it uses SSH as, or it can use SSH as its deployment mechanism. So you have a server, you can write some code and say, make that server be this way. And so it ends up being really approachable, easy to get up and running with. But I had mostly used Puppet, and in my kind of, you said personal, in my home lab environment, I had used Salt a bit, which has some technical stuff I like about it, but is probably one of the least popular ones, unless you're in some very niche use cases. But these days I'm using Ansible just because I don't want to fight anymore. I just want to use the one that people like and get over myself. So that's what I've been using even in my home lab stuff these days, just because it's easy.
You mean you stopped using the one that everybody else stopped using a long time ago? It has been resurrected, though. It has been acquired, and it has definitely seen some new life.
Yeah, I could talk longer than I should right now about the differences between Ansible and Salt.
Yeah, you're an agent guy. I can tell. You're an agent guy.
It's not the agent. Oh, you're gonna get me into it. It's not the agent stuff. I actually spent a long time trying to get the Salt SSH client to work so that I could run Salt the way that Ansible does, because that's the part I like about Ansible. And I had like bugs open with the project, and their literal answer was, we don't care enough about Salt SSH to fix this, and they closed it. So I stopped using it, and here we are.
Well, that's
totally
awesome.
separate topic. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm getting way off in the weeds on this one.
All right, so here we are. I happen to be in so I showed earlier, like, Fuzzball-Ansible is a Git repository. It's public. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. You can use it today. You won't be able to use it to deploy Fuzzball without credentials to Depot to get the containers and the packages that you need. But if you're a Fuzzball customer, you should have that, and you could use this today to deploy Fuzzball. So the first thing that you can just use it out of this Git checkout. But another thing you can do is install it with Ansible Galaxy. So Ansible has what's effectively a package manager for Ansible collections. And so this collection here actually has kind of two faces, two ways you can interact with it. And one is as an Ansible collection. We can install it. I'm forcing here because it's already installed. So otherwise it would just say, oh, you already have it. But to see the process, there is like an Ansible Galaxy server that you can just install collections out of. But you can also just point it at a Git repo, which is what we're doing here. And then by default, it'll check out this main branch, and you'll get like the latest and greatest Fuzzball. But we're also maintaining branches for each Fuzzball release. And so if you're on a specific point release of Fuzzball, you can put like 2.0.12 here and stay on that and get a checkout of this that has been tested to work with that release is the goal. But not mail. But I have this here, and it's installed. And so with that, one of the things we can do is run the playbook. So I'll walk through. I'll simplify this a little bit. So we're running the Ansible playbook command. We're going to run on the remote system as root, which is pretty typical. You either run as root over there, or you go over there as a regular root user and become root, because we're to install packages and things like that. You need to be an elevated privilege. And we're going to read our inventory, which is the configuration that we're deploying, from hosts.yaml. And I'll show that inventory in a moment. When I did this demo internally, I realized I was exposing my Depot credentials to the demo when I opened up my my inventory. So since then, I have split those credentials into an encrypted vault. So we're doing that, and then I'll be prompted for a password in a moment. And then I mentioned that little bit of kind of magic comment there in the playbook. This limit here lets us target which host we want that to run on without having to do that designation inside of our inventory, and that becomes useful when we look at Ascender here in a moment. So I can run this, type my password correctly, hopefully. Great. And we get a little bit of output. We're just going to deploy the CLI. It's already there, but it'll go through. Like I said, that the point here isn't just to do the steps, but to here is a state that I want my system to be in, make sure it is in that state. So it's going to go through and make sure the depot is set up, and then make sure that the CLI is installed, presumably from depot. It won't make sure that that's where it had come from, but it will make sure it is installed and at the correct version. So there we have it. From our command, we can see here, I'm running this with kind of a namespace. You can also run playbooks from the command line at the file. These playbooks happen to be here in this playbooks directory, so I could just point there. But if you install it this way, you don't have to worry about get all. You don't have to do the checkout or clone or anything like that. You can just install the playbook and then use it without having to worry about where all those files live. And then I'll show my inventory here. So I have a few things. I'm setting my Fuzzball version, even though I'm checking out the main version of the Ansible code. I can still say what version of Fuzzball I want to be deploying. And then I have some overrides in here for how I want my environment to be configured. So I don't have to replicate all of those default settings, but I'm setting what IP address I want certain things to be on. And there's an NFS server that's used for shared state, and I tell Fuzzball where that server lives and how to connect to it. And then Fuzzball uses Keycloak for identity management, and this distribution is setting up a Keycloak for me. So I have initial information here about how I want that Keycloak to be configured. All of this just gets overlaid on top of that default configuration, and then becomes a combined configuration within the operator that configures my eventual instance. And then finally, here's a list of hosts that it will be deployed on. I'm doing everything on one host today, but you could have an arbitrary number of hosts that have the command line interface on it, of course, and then we could set up Kubernetes on multiple hosts and deploy the operator into that kind of thing. So the next step is to see how this looks in Ascender, but any questions here before we move on?
No, I think it's important to call out there are like 58 different ways to do variables in this. So
yes,
don't get confused. It's easy to override them at a whole bunch of different levels. I think there's like 36 levels of inheritance, so be very careful.
Yeah, one of the things that I was really pleased to experience so far, I think there's not an example of it here, but I didn't know before I tried it whether I could like set a variable somewhere else and then you refer to it here in the inventory, and it just worked the way I expected it to. So I haven't like tried to find the edges of it and where it might break, but so far I've been able to define variables in one place and use them in another, and it's just done the right thing, which has been nice.
Very nice.
See, there's a question about trying out Fuzzball.
Brandon, thanks for being here, man. So he says, is there a limited feature Fuzzball or a trial Fuzzball people can use?
So there's not an on-prem deployment trial. There is active work right now. Like our next deliverable, I don't want to like to specify this, but we're working on making a version of it available in the cloud so that people could more easily try it out. We have it running in cloud environments already, but it's not like an easy onboarding process right now. So we're trying to improve that specifically so more people can just try it out without having to do a whole deployment thing.
Yeah, awesome. That was a great question.
Yeah. All right. We're going to switch over to switch back to my Chrome tab where I have Ascender running. Excellent. So we've demoed Ascender here before, but not with Fuzzball. And like I said, it's a web interface for Ansible in a reductive sense, but you can already see there's like more data here, and we plug it in with other products like Ledger that gather all the log data that comes out of Ansible otherwise, and aggregates that and helps you get more insight about what's going on in your cluster or your kind of your total IT environment. But today we're mostly going to use it to do a deployment. So I mentioned that there's two faces to this Fuzzball-Ansible thing we've developed. One is as a collection that you can install with Ansible Galaxy, and you can use that directly from the command line like we demonstrated. But I was very interested to try, and we ended up succeeding, making it also work as an Ascender project. So the way Ascender typically works is you have you make another Git repository. You make a place where you put your playbooks, and playbooks are considered kind of local data that call potentially shared data from collections and roles and things like that. And you're expected to develop those playbooks and maintain them locally. You can totally do that with Fuzzball-Ansible here, but I wanted it to not be required. So, and you can also use Fuzzball-Ansible as an Ascender playbook. So you can see that here. We have this project created, and it's just pointed at Fuzzball-Ansible right on GitHub. And by default, it will also install any collections that are required by that project. So that's all defined. You don't have to do anything. You just create a project in Ascender and add it with this with the same Git repository that that we'll be advertising in the description, and you gain the ability to do fuzzball deployments in your environment. There's one thing that isn't automatic, but we're developing some documentation about, and hopefully we'll be putting an article out about this soon. In order to do depot, you can just put variables in your environment, but that's a little bit unlovely. We've also defined this custom credential type for CIQ depot that lets you specify your depot user and token and server in a secure way, like how I was talking about wanting to separate the credentials from your inventory. So we provide a template for doing that. And I don't know if there's a distribution mechanism for custom credential types, or if we'll just need to document that, and then people can do this kind of thing. Oh, I'm in the wrong template. So here I have this depot credential that says I'm going to use depot to get packages as myself, and then the token is encrypted and not shown as you would want. But once we have this project and it pulls in the playbooks, those playbooks are available to be run as what Ascender calls templates. So we have just to have a complete example here, we have a template for each of those playbooks. So we can see an example. Here's the CLI template. It is really just a reference to that same playbook. We can see the path to it here. But once we have all of those, and I could just run that directly, but you can tie them together as this workflow template. And this ends up looking cool. Rather than go into it directly, I'll run it, and then we can see what that looks like. And every stage along the way, whether it's in the inventory or in each of the job templates or here in the workflow template, we can specify additional configurations. So just like we had in the inventory, we can put that I want to be running Fuzzball version 2011 here, just because that's what I was running when I did this deployment. So we can go back here to our deploy Fuzzball, click this little rocket here. It may fail the first time. There's a bug in the version of Ascender that I'm using. Yeah, it failed, but it will work the second time. I have been told that this bug has been fixed, and I just didn't want to risk breaking the whole thing by upgrading my Ascender before the demo. So on the second try, it should be fine. And we get this cool little visualization of these three tasks are running in parallel. If you do this on the command line, typically the way it runs by default, each step would just run one at a time. It'd run on all the hosts. Each play would run on all the hosts that it's applied to simultaneously, but it would kind of do one play at a time. But here in Ascender, we have the flexibility to say these three are independent. You can run them in any order or together, but then orchestrate can't run until we have an RKE2 environment. So we're actually deploying a Kubernetes cluster here, and the NFS server is ready because orchestrate depends on both of those. And then substrate, which is the compute agent. This is the thing that runs on the compute resource and receives work from orchestrate. we can deploy that as soon as this NFS system is ready. Because even if Orchestrate isn't ready to send it work, we could still be setting up the compute nodes. And so we get this little dependency graph. We get status information about what is done, what's started, and what is left to be done. And we can click into any of these and get that same log output that we were seeing on the command line before for each step as it happens.
The other thing, I know that this job doesn't require them, but you can also have failures and rollbacks. So if any one of these tasks fail, you could go correct anything else on the other tasks that have already run.
Yeah, I haven't done any kind of responsiveness in this. They just fail, and I think maybe I've used retries, but yeah, as Rose was kind of alluding to before, I'm still relatively new to the Ascender space. It's been cool to have an excuse to use it, and as soon as we, like I said, as soon as we started moving to the operator, it's like, this is finally a thing that I would love to use with Ascender. So
it's the best way to learn a new tool.
Yeah,
a real world use case.
See back here. Oh, there we go. Come back here and see. Nope. Trying to get back to my activity. Here we go. So yeah, it's still going. We can come in here and see that this is running, but this is the bulk of it. We have time for questions and stuff. I'm happy to keep talking about this, but that is the demo for what it is worth.
It's awesome.
It is very cool. It's always cool when multiple tools come together and come together as a solution, or at least making one easier to deploy like you've done. It's really cool. I'll be interested to see, as customers get their hands on Fuzzball with the ability for Ascender to touch all infrastructure, how people start pulling all of this back in. So deploying massive HPC environments, working in the storage space, network security, and then pulling ledger data back in. It's going to be really cool to see how all of this ties back together into a big, nice picture.
Yeah. The coolest single thing for me with this so far has been, I showed, let's go back to it. So in this template here, so this is the workflow template for the entire deployment. And a customer's deployment doesn't have to be exactly the one I have. Maybe they have an existing Kubernetes cluster and they don't need to deploy one. That part a customer would do themselves. But I like setting the Fuzzball version right here at the top level, and I've been able to upgrade by just editing, changing this number, and rerunning, and I just have an updated Fuzzball, and that is quite an improvement in the experience of upgrading Fuzzball over previous ways that we've had to do it. So yeah, I'm glad to put this into people's hands, and at various levels. Again, you can use the Ansible stuff today if you're just using Ansible on the command line. If you're interested in Ascender, I'm sure there are many people here at CIQ that would love to show that off to you and get that in your hands. And then Fuzzball as well.
I think the other part that I would love to see you do is, since all of Ascender is API driven, do this all via API without ever logging in the actual GUI.
Yes, that would be cool. I have not done that yet. In fact, I don't think I've touched the Ascender API at all myself. But yes, that seems like a good next
be really cool.
work.
Tying it into an actual workflow to upgrade your entire cluster like that, just from an API call, it's pretty cool.
Yep.
So cool.
I do not see any questions yet.
Well, this was awesome, Jonathan. This is such a wonderful way to highlight all of the work that you have been doing, and that CIQ and all the engineers here have been doing behind the scenes with Fuzzball and with Ascender, and like seeing it kind of come to life a little bit more each day. It's like really awesome. Appreciate it.
It is really cool.
I'm working on a write-up for this. So, for people who would be interested in it and want a guide rather than having to watch a video. So once that's published, I'll try to make sure that gets linked also in the description for this. But yeah, love to hear any questions or feedback that people have using it or looking at it regardless.
Yeah. Awesome.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Jonathan.
Absolutely.
Yes. Thank you. So remember, you guys, if questions do come up, you can leave them in the little chat right there. You can also go to ciq.com. We've got all kinds of blog posts and other demos and information and places where you can, put in your specific questions, and then that gets directed right to us. So we can make sure that we can get you some like one-on-one time with us, talk a little bit more about your infrastructure, your environment, what it is, the problems and challenges that you're running into, and how we can maybe help simplify things with Ascender and or Fuzzball. We'd love to chat with you more about that. So thank you again, Jonathon, for your time and all your good work, and everyone behind the scenes that made all of this possible. Very, very, very grateful.
Thank you, Rose. Thank you, Zane. It's glad to be here.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
See you.